if you knew you were enough? What would your life look like? What would love look like? This is the Enough Factor broadcast, where we're redefining what makes you enough in life and in love. Now here's your host, Suzette Birnall. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Enough Factor podcast. I am elated that you joined me today. Out of all the podcasts you could be listening to right now, you've decided to listen to this one, and that's pretty special. Today, we have a great episode. We're going deep into relationship territory, so buckle up. Helping me is coach, educationist, and LGBTQ plus coaching professional, Phil Sanger. But first, I got to show some love to my Enough Warriors. You tune in every week, yes, because this is the I Am Enough station for you, and that message resonates. Yet, you need the extra clarity, especially when challenged in your relationships. And that's why this podcast goes underneath the skin to where doubt resides. It debunks the myths you've been fed and offers you a counteractant, if that's a word. We amplify your voice, your value, and your vision, what I call 3 critical factors of enoughness. So you can write your own definition on your own terms and love from an empowered standpoint. If you are new, I encourage you to give a listen to season 1, episode 1, where I break it down even further. But now I can't wait to talk with Phil. We had such a wonderful first conversation, which is something I do. I do it to get acquainted with my guests and to decide together what would align with the mission of this podcast. And we take the struggle out of relationships. My conversation with Phil was so enlightening. You see, Phil focuses on health, relationships, and creativity. Born and raised in Yorkshire, UK, he is an LGBTQ plus transdisciplinary practitioner working at the intersection of well-being, dance, and academia. However, over the last 5 years or so, while teaching dance at the university, he's noticed the increase of students with mental health challenges, depression, anxiety, and the like. So a lot of his work has been to support them in building resilience, real-world skills, and that sort of thing. His work consistently intersected with the LGBTQ plus community, helping individuals to acclimate in a healthy and authentic way. So I want you to join me in giving a warm Enough Factor podcast welcome to Phil Sanger. Welcome, Phil.
Thank you so much. That was such an amazing introduction. I feel like I want to pay you to give me a voiceover for every time.
Hey, you know what? I will do it. I will do it because, I mean, you made such a great impact on me. We didn't know each other prior to our initial conversation, but what I really loved about you was you have such a genuineness about you, such an empathetic type of aura, and I said, he's the real deal. He is the real deal. And so even out of our conversation, I was like, oh man, I cannot wait to talk relationships with Phil. But Phil, before we go into that, I like to start out my conversations with what I call a truth and dare. Mm-hmm. Now, the good news is it isn't the traditional truth or dare game, okay? The bad news is you don't get to choose which you'll answer.
Why do I feel nervous?
Don't be nervous. Or as they say here, don't be scared. I promise you it'll be a great question. And I truly believe you are a person who will answer it from the heart. Okay, so are you ready?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
Okay, so what is the truth about you that a significant relationship required you to confront and dared you to transform?
Okay, let me get my thing. I'm just going to apologize for the squeaky chair that I've chosen to sit on for this. If you hear the squeaky noise, that is a deep question. So the significant relationship that I'm in is one with my partner. And the truth from that relationship is that he really brought me into my enoughness. I'm going to use your word from your introduction. I trained at a relatively small but quite prestigious dance school in the UK. And I had a very up and down journey about whether or not I was good enough to be there. And my partner trained at a very significant school in New York at Juilliard. And when we first got together, it brought out so many insecurities in me about what I offer as in the dance side of what I do in the performing arts. But he kind of brought from me, he drew out everything that I know about myself in conversation, in love, in spirituality. He drew it out and he helped me to kind of reframe it pretty much in the way that you described that, like that enoughness. He helped me to realize that I am enough, not because of what I've done, where I've done it, or why I've done it, but just because I showed up and I embraced it and I worked with it. And I think that is like the biggest truth from that relationship, is that I don't need anything other than me. One of my biggest saboteurs is the hyperachiever, feeling like I need to get more and more and more and more qualifications and skills. And I've kind of really overinvested in courses and things like that. And since meeting him, that's definitely dissipated. I feel like I can just show up and be myself in conversation with people, in relationship to people, and I don't need decorations. So that's the truth. And the dare is being able to show up and do that. Like the truth is knowing it, and then the dare is actually showing up and living it and choosing not to overindulge in courses and qualifications and say, okay, this is it, I'm here and I'm enough.
Yes, I hear what you're saying, because the listeners for this podcast are overachievers too. And I think we all are. I think we are socialized to be that field. Mm-hmm. I really do. And I think that's a disservice, because we have been taught that to qualify ourselves is in what we do, what we achieve, what we accomplish. Mm-hmm. And even though we hear words like authenticity and all that tossed around, it sounds real good. The truth is, most of us don't even know how to show up. And I think that's what makes what you do so relevant. In order for people to truly have the kind of relationships they really want to have, those fulfilling, meaningful, romantic, intimate relationships, they have to know how to show up, right? Mm-hmm. And so talk to me about how you help people in the LGBTQ plus community to show up against that backdrop. Mm-hmm. That oftentimes makes them feel like they're not worthy.
Yeah.
Because they don't fit a certain cookie cutter expectation of what loving is supposed to be like, or what sexuality is supposed to be like.
Yeah. I guess one of the main places that I do that is when people are working towards coming out and what that might mean to their families and to their friends. And I think coming out is actually only a little part of it. So when somebody comes to me and they're they're confiding in me that they're having these feelings and that they're wanting to come out, or they're considering coming out to their family. The kind of bigger conversation is like, okay, so that's going to be step one, you come out. But then how do you stay out? And that's like a much bigger conversation in terms of requiring you to be authentic and show up as who you are. The first step is to kind of do it with your friends and family, but then so many times people will communicate with me in a way that they presume that I'm straight, and it takes more courage to then correct them and say, actually, no, my partner's not female, he's male. And it's like a coming out all over again. And I find that I come out daily to people who make an assumption that I'm straight. And I think the point that I'm trying to make within this is that when I'm working with clients, it's making a daily commitment to show up as who you are, whatever that means to you. And it's not really about sexuality. That's just kind of a conversation that for me is on the periphery. You know, like, who are you? What do you enjoy? What do you love doing? What gets you up in the morning? And then you have to kind of feed what you do into all of that. Do you know what I mean?
I do. And that's the key, I think, to the whole being authentic, being real. You know, some people think real means I'm being honest, meaning I'm going to tell you whether you look good in that shirt or not. You know, that's the level of honesty. But no, authentic goes much deeper. And it's in those areas that most of us, if we have difficulty with it, it's because somebody taught us that how we felt was not as important as what we do. Is that kind of what your backstory is as well? Kind of growing. I know with mine, performance was the main thing, and that's why I find that whether a person is gay or not gay, the journey inward is the same, isn't it?
Yes, it's the same for everybody, and I would say a massive part of anybody's journey is learning how to feel your feelings, learning how to process your emotions and not shove them away. Because with a coming out story, there's often a lot of shame attached to it. I feel like I see that less the more I work with people. There seems to be an acceptance growing. So when I speak to younger people, the shame is not as obvious there. But in my generation, like I'm 40 now, and in my generation, there is definitely an element of shame to coming out, to that not being the norm, and then feeling ashamed of who you are.
Yeah.
And I think to get through shame, you first have to learn how to process it by feeling it. So when I am feeling shame, what does that feel like? How can I really get to the fundamental physicality of it? So shame for me shows up as there's like a weight in my stomach. There is a sense of nausea sometimes. And if I sit with myself and I describe these kind of feelings, I can sort of realize, okay, that's just the physicality of shame. And this is the worst that can happen of feeling shameful. There's nothing fatal is going to happen to me. Nothing really, really bad is going to happen if I can just sit and process this shame. And then it passes, and then it's like, okay, so what do I want to feel instead? And that for me is part of the journey of moving through the negativity of coming out into something more positive and open.
So we were talking about, I think we coined a new term together, relationship consciousness.
Yes.
See, we smart like that, y'all. See, we come together and we create words. But that's what it sounds like. It's like, is a block to really being conscious within yourself and conscious in your relationships, is that underlying hindrance, shame. Because isn't it shame that keeps you from showing up? Shame that makes you feel like you have to kind of dial it back, pretend, because
and so deeply connected with that not enoughness. Like if I'm feeling shame, I don't feel like I am enough to be with anybody. And so that is definitely a big block. I mean, I love the work of Brené Brown, all the vulnerability work. And I also love Michael Bernard Beckwith, if you know him as well. Yeah. And he says that the universe doesn't give you what you want, it gives you who you are. And if you are shameful, you beget shame in all of your experiences. And I do truly believe that. So if you can connect to something deep, and like this is where that authentic comes in, what is your essence? If you can connect to that and be it, then the universe kind of shows up in that guise.
Wow. Yeah. So when the students come to you, do you have a way of ushering them into a greater sense of consciousness, a greater sense of showing up? Have you found that with working with different students and people that have come to you, that you kind of notice you're doing this sort of thing with them to help them to stop being so concerned about what their parents think, what society thinks, what's the expectations of the achievement world, the performance world, to really kind of usher them into staying within themselves and dealing with those feelings and processing that shame? Is there a way that you kind of walk them into it or guide them into it?
It's always very different. Every situation, of course, is always unique. But one of the things that I do try to do is to get rid of considerations of parents, family, and friends in the first instance. And it's like, let's just deal with who you are in this space right now. And trying to connect them to a free place. You know, if you can just imagine that relationship doesn't exist, just temporarily, then who would you allow yourself to become? Who would you be without the thoughts about that person? And it often does give them the little sort of shake of, it's like, okay, well, if that wasn't an issue, I would like to show up in this way. And then we explore how they can start to integrate in their practices away from home first, to really kind of build and strengthen their own sense of belonging. Because I think until they feel kind of really bolstered as a being from within themselves, I think the conversations with anybody else are just going to kind of hit a brick wall. So it's really always about, who are you without all of that first? Can you get to imagine yourself without all of that?
So instead of them eating the whole elephant, they're taking a bite at a time. So instead of doing the big, risky thing, they kind of get ushered into small steps of being fully who they'd want to be, if there was no other consideration. It's like baby steps toward that. And if you can master the baby steps, the little ways that you come out, the little ways that you stand in your truth, the little ways, and then keep building before you get to the big reveal, so to speak.
Yeah. And then the conversation would kind of turn to, and I think we talked about this when we met before, it's having that conversation that friends and family will often react as though this change has happened overnight. And they can often feel like they don't know who you are anymore. That like, yesterday you were this person who I believed you to be, and now you're telling me this about you. And it's like, I didn't know you at all. And that can be a perspective that friends and family show up with, this idea that you've just changed overnight because you've come out. And so there's work that we do about how you negotiate that and navigate that kind of situation, and understanding that that is just their interpretation of the situation. Yeah. And staying true to the fact that, no, this has been going on for forever.
And you've brought up a great point, because if there is a desire in all of us for connection, right? But the challenge becomes, how do you connect intimately with someone without losing yourself in the process?
Yeah.
Without becoming responsible for how they feel, without being consumed with trying to please them, right?
Yeah.
And so you're leading them and guiding them in small wins before they really face the big giant, so to speak. But the small wins, it helps them to get strength in who they are. It helps them to build. It's like exercising a muscle. You don't start out, well, you can if you want to start out on the elliptical machine.
And some people do, yeah. Some people go right in there and they say, I'm just going to rip this Band-Aid off and then deal with it.
And that's them, that's great. But at my age now, I realize I have not been exercising the way that I was. I have not been exercising that way. If I were to go in the gym right now and try to lift, let's say, even a 50-pound weight over my head and keep doing that, my muscles would scream and cuss at me. And I would have to get seen, because I might end up really damaging myself because my body's not used to lifting that weight. And I think when I'm working with women, that's the issue. They want, I want Mr. Right. I want that forever love. I want my happily ever after. But if your history has been that you keep attracting or bringing into your life broken people, dysfunctional relationships, toxic people, then you can't just go from that to Mr. Right, like boom, because you don't even know what that feels like. You don't even know in your body, in your brain, in your muscle memory. You don't even have a familiarity with what it's like to be in a relationship with a good person or with the right person. You don't even know it yet. So even with the right person, you can still lose yourself.
Yeah.
Because you're bringing that same unchanged, untransformed you into the mix. And so even though you deal with the LGBTQ community and I deal with high achieving women who want real love and true partnership, it's still that same journey though. Isn't it?
Yeah. It's the same journey for everybody, the same sort of self-discovery that you have to do. Probably better if you did it before you got in a relationship, but that never happens. But I think then we have to, in this idea of relationship consciousness, like, can you then use the relationship as your transformation?
Yeah.
Rather than just getting sucked down the plug hole of passion and lust and love and all of those things that come with the beginning of a relationship.
Yeah, it's like, can you hold your own? Because the relationship is going to have all these dips and swirls. That's just the way it is, But I think, because using me for an example, the reason I kept losing myself in relationships is because I did not know what my inner steady was. I wasn't grounded in what made me enough. If I lost the man, it's because I didn't perform well. Whether it's I didn't cook the cornbread the way he liked it, maybe I talked too much. All these things that are very performance related. Maybe I didn't wear my hair the right way. Maybe I interrupted him too much. Maybe my opinion was too much. And so we start really peeling back ourselves. And that's because there's nobody that has led us into this connection with really what grounds us, that grounding thing that doesn't change no matter who it is.
Yeah.
So I think that whole relationship consciousness, not losing yourself, remaining conscious, remaining who you are, remaining conscious of how you feel and what defines you.
I feel like there's also a process of taking off. And I think we pick up a lot of things as we grow up. We take on behaviors from parents and society and things like that. And within a relationship, for me, I think there's a big part of it is about taking off things that you've learned that aren't you in that journey towards authenticity. Like a big thing for me, I have a very, very anxious mother. She's terrified of everything, cars. When I came out to her, she was like, "Oh no, you're going to get murdered and beaten up." And she really kind of carries terror and fear. And then this is also one of the things that I think has really come to the surface in my relationship now, is that I'm noticing that I'm starting to worry about him. Like we've been together for 2 years. And because of COVID, I'm spending more time at home, and he'll go out to work, and I'm doing like my mum's thing of, oh, be careful. And I start to make up these catastrophe stories about what's going to happen to him on the way to work. And I'm like, that doesn't belong to me. That's my mother's worry. That's not who I am. And I've noticed in being able to observe that in myself, it doesn't just go away, but I can at least start to just keep brushing it off. No. And that brings me back to the truer self and to the authenticity and the core of who I am.
I think that's another part of being conscious too, Phil, because if you're able to kind of help yourself get back into a place of alignment, then that not only means you've learned the skill, it means you know it works. It comes out of your own experience. And I can imagine that's why you're able to be such a gift and a guide to the students that you lead, because of your own authentic journey. And even when I think about coming out, as you were talking about coming out to your mother, I'm like, isn't that really what we all are having to do every day? We're all having to come out, especially in a society that tells us that we have a right to be who we are, but punishes us for being who we are. Right? It takes a lot of courage, because the world is not really created to support you as you are. It's made to support you in being what it wants you to be. But if you ever color outside the lines or think outside the box, there is some kind of retaliation or punishment. So and I never thought of it until I talk to you right now, to stand in your authentic truth, to be who you really are, to be conscious in your relationships is a decision every day to come out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
And includes coming out with the thoughts that you're having about the relationship. I think that's a big part of the communication between you. You know, like I'm always trying to be really like an open book in my communication with my partner. I try to realize that if I get annoyed, I'm not annoyed at him. I'm just having annoyed thoughts about stuff. And I try to keep that open. I try to come out with things. It's like, I'm having some thoughts about this situation. I can't think of an example right now, but it would be that I'm having thoughts about this situation, and those thoughts are making me feel crap right now. Let's talk. And I think I totally agree with you that everybody can come out in some form or another. Outing your thoughts, outing your judgments, outing your fears, outing your feelings, so that they're on the table and you can decide which ones are true, which ones belong to you, which ones are garbage, which ones you want to stand by.
I think is also knowing who to come out to and under what circumstances to come out, especially when we're talking about and I'm at this particular time I'm talking about being yourself in relationship. Is a certain coming out that happens. I mean, in the euphoria, in the first phase of relationship, when you're in the euphoria, you're just so happy to have some kind of similarities or that kind of verve and energy and all this wonderful attraction stuff is just kind of bouncing around and it feels so groovy, right? But then the real coming out is when that relationship goes into that phase of, some people call it discovery, some people call it the power struggle, whatever way you want to describe it. But it's when the smoke starts clearing and you start noticing things about each other. That person may not think your snorting when you laugh is as cute as they did in the beginning. And they're kind of like, can you get that thing fixed? you know, when you start kind of noticing things that are not falling as cute as they used to, you're around each other more, or that person that used to pay all this attention to you now is distracted by something else. Yeah. They're not giving you whatever that thing was. And that's when I think your ability to really come out is really tested, because you're wondering, does this person like me because of how they felt like I fit their box? Or do they have the capacity for me to come out and they can accept it? They have the bandwidth to want to work through it with me. Do they really want me because of who I am or who they thought I was?
Yeah.
Right. So how did you find in your partnership? Because of course, at some point y'all dated before you became partners, right? So how did you discover that this person had the capacity or the desire, the bandwidth for you to come out emotionally, come out in all these other ways?
This relationship, I think, was there was a decision ahead of time to be fully transparent in this relationship. Like a series of relationships that have gone bad for many reasons. And then I was single for a very long time, like 7 years. I decided I just wanted to be single. And when I started dating again, what I noticed is that I was drawn to people who had things that I hadn't yet done, like learning to drive, like buy a house, these sorts of things. And so I went on a process of doing all those things. I passed my driving test, I saved up, I got my deposit, and all of those things are rolling. And then once I'd done that work on myself, and then there was nothing that I needed from somebody, I was able to go into a relationship and just be open to them and everything that they had to offer. And I was completely transparent about that the whole way. Only this time I've had like 3 significant relationships and then several like short-term things. And this is the only time that I've ever done that. And it's so beautiful. It's unfolded in such a way that all those things that you're talking about are not really there. When you say, you talk about people fitting in your box. One of my teachers, Brooke Castillo, she calls it a manual. She says that we have a working manual for every person in our life. It's like a rule book. The way we expect them to behave, the way we react to what they do. But we never give it to them. We have these rule books that people don't have. And so when they start to annoy us or piss us off, it's because they're not following the rules that they don't have. And so having this kind of concept in my head, my rule book is gone. I don't have any rule books for my relationship. And I try to recognize that if my feelings start to change about a behavior that used to be endearing and is now annoying, I know that it's because my thoughts about it have changed. And I do the work to find out, okay, so what am I thinking about that behavior now that's giving me a different feeling to when we first met? And then I know that I can choose to go back to the original thought.
Mm.
I know it is endearing because it still reminds me of the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You know, and I hear you saying that, and maybe you threw out that particular rule book or manual, but it's like you did have some rules for yourself, not necessarily rules specifically for them, but rules for yourself, because like you said, you went into it transparent in a way that you had not been before. And when you said that, my eyes lit up, because I'm like, Phil, I knew we were twin souls, because that's what happened with this relationship, my husband and I. So
and it's because it's coming back to what we were talking about earlier about the feelings, like the authenticity comes back to that feeling place of knowing how you feel, spending the time to understand how things are making you feel, what thoughts are you having that are making you feel those feelings, and giving yourself permission to express the feeling.
So, Phil, as we draw this to a close, I have gained something rich, I feel like, to not only help me, but also to help my clients. And so I thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been really useful for me also.
So what do you want our listeners to take away? If there was anything that you'd want them to take away from our conversation, what would it be?
To have the courage to feel. And, you know, courage is not a good feeling. Like, I think courage comes with this idea that, I'm courage and I'm brave, but it's not. Courage doesn't feel good. And we have to lean into that discomfort of courage when we are exploring our own emotions. And I think if you can do that, then you can do anything.
That's it. Well, I'm going to leave it right there. Thanks again, Phil. And thank you, listeners, for tuning in. And you know the way I always want to leave you. Just in case no one has told you, or you're going through some kind of challenge that might make you second guess, I don't want you to even doubt that you are worthy. You are worth it. You are more than enough. Bye. You have just listened to the Enough Factor podcast with your host, Suzette Vernon. To get notified of new episodes or to dig deeper into today's topic, become a subscriber. And while you're at it, tell us how we're doing and what topics you're interested in. We appreciate your feedback and your reviews. Until next time, remember, you are worthy, you are worth it, you are enough.